everyone. I'm 𝗏𝗏𝗁𝗀𝗏𝗀. I'm the director of the National Yangming Jiaotong University Library Yangming campus, and I'm also the director of the discipline under the category of National Council of Science and Technology we called Science, Society, and Communication. So it's my pleasure to say some words at the beginning of today's mini symposium or forums that related to Anthropocene studies and Cold War science policy. The reason why I put it together as two. The first reason is Anthropocene study is a new trend. A lot of people talk about, activities outside being like a human-centered perspective. They want to see more. More see them from the broader viewpoint. But still, the way of awareness, say like human beings are not the only species in the world. That has something to do. It's also a historical process. And that kind of thing has some importance in East Asia just because Cold War played a big role to shape how industrial East Asia looked like this. So I think it's the first attempt to put this as a very old topic of Cold War science and a very new one of Anthropocene studies together. So that's today's top theme. And it's happy, we have several guests from outside of Taiwan to help us to make it possible. The first one is Professor Bong-Sung Park. He teaches at KAIST, one of the leading universities in Korea, and also Professor Gergely. And he now teaches at National Pusan University. Before that, he spent a year as a postdoc at Max Planck Institute. So he's a very good casting. And also we have a guest from Japan, Osaka University, Professor 𝗘𝗃𝗁𝗁𝗂𝗃𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁 then for this today's event, we featured two promising, young scholars as moderators. For the morning session, we'll have Dr. 𝗂_hi from National Taiwan University. He's an expert on the underwater landscape in Taipei. He's a historian as well as a social scientist. Very fit for morning session. And for the afternoon session that focus on Cold War period, we have Jun-Yong Lee. Currently, he is a visiting student. He's from Johns Hopkins University and currently visiting here as a visiting student under my supervision. So it's very happy to have her also here as one of his sort of the debut in Asia on this topic. Very happy to have them. And we also have to thank about the list of all the local professors for example, the Professor Chen Jianyuan from the National Zhongxin University, and also in the afternoon session you will see Professor 𝗔_히_ႌ from the National Chun-Yi University. So I'm so grateful to have them doing together to organize some of the meaningful sessions. So without further ado, I will hand this microphone to today's morning session moderator, Dr. 𝗂, please.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the Anthropocene Landscape Rethinking Environmental History with New Materialisms Roundtables. My name is Chun-Yi 𝗂, and I'm currently a research scholar at the Graduate Institute of National Development at National Taiwan University. Today's roundtable is part of the academic exchange on the theme of entangling object, new perspective on material cultures. And our panel focused on Anthropocene, and as Dr. 𝗂 has said, Anthropocene is a very important keyword in our changing world, as we witness the effects of human activities on Earth, from global climate change to the loss of the biodiversity. So it is crucial to learn more about the Anthropocene and how we can live with this damaged planet. So In the morning session, we have 3 speakers here to share their insight with us. First, we have Professor Bong-Sung Park, and Professor Park is a well-trained historian of science and technology, and is also the director of the Center for Anthropocene Study at KAIST, and also served as the president of Association for East Asian Environmental History. And our second speaker is Professor 𝗘হি𝘁𝗵𝗿𝗶. Professor 𝗘·হি teaches at Osaka University, and he's a medical anthropologist, and he conducts his ethnographic work on herbal gardens in Japan and Vietnam. And our third speaker is Dr. Dominic Medes. Dr. Medes is a postdoctoral researcher of Taiwan-German collaborations on the material culture at Academia Sinica. And he's also an expert on medicinal science in the 19th century China. And today he will present his recent research on the coal mines in Pingxiang, Jiangxi province, China, in the early 20th century. Okay, so each speaker will present for 50 to 20 minutes, and starting with Professor Park, and followed by Professor 𝗘·히 and Dr. Medes. After their presentation, we will open up the floor to questions from the audience in these rooms. And we hope that through our conversations, we can shed light on some of the complexities surrounding Anthropocenes. Okay, so please welcome our first speakers, Professor Bong-Sung Park.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you for your kind introduction. And I feel very honored to be here and to share my thoughts about the Anthropocene, and also some of the case studies that we are doing at the Center for Anthropocene Studies at KAIST. Anthropocene literally means the human epoch. And this is the concept suggested that we are living in a different world, on a different earth, where the humans have become a great geological agent, that the humans, the force of humans can be comparable to the forces of volcanoes, even asteroids and other old-time geological forces. And so this is a geological concept, and so in the geological community there is a great debate whether this is a proper concept or not. And then the debate is still going on, and the Anthropocene Working Group has prepared 9 candidates for what is called golden spike, the evidence, and then it's going to be suggested to the Geological Society, and then will be discussed, and then to whether it's going to be approved or not. And it's going to take not just a few years, but I would say that probably a few decades. But what is interesting is that that concept, which was suggested, proposed in year 2000, after several years, it took a firestorm among the people in the humanities and social sciences, and arts and the literary circles, because it challenged the way we think about history, philosophy, society, nature, and almost everything, and then thinking about the future. So the question is then how seriously we should take into consideration. And so today I'm going to, especially in the context of environmental history, what should we deal with the Anthropocene? Do we need, does environmental history need Anthropocene concept? Second, Does we have to change our concept of history in the Anthropocene if it is a new geological era? And how to provincialize the Anthropocene concept in Asia? In other words, what does the concept mean to people in Asia? Because the concept was devised, proposed in the Western world, spreading to the world, and then do we have to take it as some kind of universal truth, or should we think it in a very different way? So I'm going to give you a quick answer and then move into my case studies. The quick answer is some of the environmental historians said, well, probably not. We don't need the concept of the Anthropocene because the entanglement between the human history and Earth history has been one of the big topics in environmental history. We have been working on that for many decades. So it's not something very new. And then there is an example, Richard White's organic machine. But there are some other environmental historians like John McNeill who said that it's going to be a game changer. We have to change the way we conduct history because there are so many evidence that comes from nature, not from documents. And so and especially in the 20th century, it's totally different. And then we have to take it into consideration. And then he worked with actually with the scientists, and then he took a look at the graphs made by scientists, and then he named it. Wow, this is the great acceleration. Okay, and then he took that idea from the great transformation. And then he proposed that we have to change completely the way environmental history should be written, at least in the 20th century and later. And then he used the pulpit of American Historical Association's presidential address. He became the president. And then I actually happened to be attending that, and I was very impressed by what he called the peak document. He got that idea from peak oil, which means that the documents reaching a certain top level, and then all the important information could be gained from those sources other than documents. Sort of, for example, ecological sources, nature, or other things. And we have to pay attention to those sources if we are going to write about history. So he's fundamentally wanting to change the profession of history in terms of education and also in terms of research. And the very philosophical and theoretical level, the very famous historian 𝗘হি chakrabarti said that, oh, absolutely, that we have to change our, not just the practice of history, but the concept of history itself has to be changed because we have been used to a sense that the human history is different from Earth history. It was separate, but the Anthropocene has a message that no longer it's possible. The collapse of age-old division between natural history and human history, and we have to think about that. And so he's saying the progress of human rights and economic development, study of economic development, and the problems of capitalism is all important, but we have to also put that in the context of changes what is known as a background. But the background became a very important factor. I think it is very important, and he went on to say that now the planet has to be a very important topic in the humanities. Okay, the humanities, think that Earth used to be just in the domain of the earth scientists. No longer, because the essence of humanity is to think about what life means, how to exist, how to live together, and then all these are put in the context of the stability of the living environment that we are in. And so the planet should be in the category of the humanities. And the third question, how to deal with Anthropocene in Asia. And there are some fine scholars, the Mark Hudson, placing Asia in the Anthropocene. And then he proposed 3 ways of thinking that. And one is what is the role of Asia in histories of Anthropocene? And then, which means that contributions of, for example, climate change by China and India and then Korea and Japan in terms of producing carbon dioxide, and then we can think about this. And vulnerabilities, social and ecological vulnerabilities. And then because there are so many people living in Asia, and then many of them are in very vulnerable places like a port, seafront cities, and then if the sea level rises, then it's going to be a lot of problem, and the Asian cities are exposed to problems. And the third is a more conceptual level, how the Asian experience could be used in sort of sophisticating the concept of the Anthropocene. And that's a very good questions. He set up these questions and then open up the future scholars to work on the Anthropocene. And then quite recently, Elizabeth Chun-Yi says that, well, in Asia, the Anthropocene should be seen a very different way, and especially the case of electricity, and then the issue of energy. And in the West, it's interpreted in a very capitalistic way, and the big oil companies making profits and greedy, and then international sort of exploitations, and those are very familiar topics to us in historical descriptions. But she found that in Asia there are not many oil productions, but at the same time, and the question is how to make use of energy for development, not just selling oils and the dominant forces in the world. And so we have to switch to other focus. And then I think that this is a very convincing case. So the 3 are the questions that I laid out. And so Anthropocene landscapes. Anthropocene is a global concept. It's not just the Korean Anthropocene, Japanese Anthropocene, and Chinese. I mean, we can talk about this, but the Anthropocene concept is a universal concept. But at the same time, I think we can take into consideration how the Anthropocene changed the landscapes. The wide landscapes is the space where we can see the interactions between humans and non-humans, or how they get entangled. And so you can see multiple temporalities in human, nature, and non-human A, non-human B, and C has its own temporal progress and temporal issues, and then at certain time it meets, and then it creates a very interesting way of seeing the survival strategies and all vulnerabilities and other things. And so it's very contingent and patience. So I'm going to talk about this. And the first case is the DNZ area. in the 𝗄𝗏 County, and this is a study, my study in collaboration with Professor 𝗟·히𝗁, and Professor 𝗟·히𝗁 was the research professor at the Center for Anthropocene Studies, but now she got hired in Yonsei University in the Department of Cultural Anthropology. And this is the picture taken in a trap camera. So the cranes don't know that the motion is taking. It's on the rice paddy, within not within DMZ, but just outside the DMZ. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. And this is the second case study, which is Chun-Yi Bay in the southwest side of Korea, and it's work done. It's in progress with Dr. Hana-san, and it's the cranes. Some cranes, hooded cranes, are included, but there are a lot of migratory, especially winter migratory birds, like geese and the dogs, and coming to this Chun-Yi Bay, and the two case studies. And first, 𝗄𝗏. And 𝗄𝗏 is, see, you can see, right in the middle of Korean Peninsula. It's a really, and middle in terms of north and south, and east and west. And this is a 38 parallel. So after the liberation, after the end of World War II, 45, and then after, before the Korean War, the peninsula was divided into the Soviet occupation, the north, and then U.S. occupation, the south. And this area, 𝗄𝗏, was on the north side, in the north side. And but after the war, after the Korean War, which is from 1950 to 1953, after armistice, and the line was drawn. This is sort of a truce line, and it's called a demilitarized line, and then it's drawn according to the fight line, and then upper 2 kilometers, and then down 2 kilometers. There is a zone, like a buffer zone that no one should be in. But that's not true, actually. Soldiers are patrolling, and then non-humans are living there. And so this is the demilitarized line, and then there's 2 kilometers up and 2 kilometers down. This is a southern front. And in the south, the Korean government set up a different line, which is a civilian control line. This is a civilian control line, and then this whole zone is called civilian control zone (CCZ), and it's a heavily controlled by the military, and so that you can go in and then do your agricultural work and farming, but you cannot stay, and then you have to come back. There is a checkpoint. Come in and come back, right? And but interesting thing is that that line, civilian control zones line, CCZ line, is moving on. And this is a line before 1990s, and this red line is the mid-1990s, and then there's a new line, which means it's going north and to accommodate the demands of development of the people who are doing some farming, and so and also depending on the relationship between the north and south. It's a very politically and economically driven, but it has a lot of impact on the way humans and non-humans are interacting with. And this is the picture that I took when I visited the DMZ. It's North Korea's Labour Party headquarters, which was built by the Soviet. And Soviet tank came down and then set up this. And then actually, this is the area where, just like a Ukraine attack, the Soviet amassed large number of tanks, and then on one day just came down to South Korea. And so somehow it survived heavy bombing during the Korean War, and then you can see some kind of scaffolding, and this is very near to the checkpoint, right? So it's a tourist attraction these days. And this is inside the 𝗔_𝗁, where there is a rice paddy and then numerous cranes. The cranes are endangered species, and they are coming to this area. Accidentally, actually. And then you can see this all is red crown cranes. Has the red on the top. It's very admired, and then very few. You can see coming. There is a survey studied in 1999, and about 300. Now it's about more than 1,000. And this is a white-naped crane, and it's the same. It's an endangered species, and then now it's more than 5,000. And altogether, the whole population, about half of the whole population in the world, are coming in this area. So this is special. But what's interesting is that it has risen quite a lot, and then before 1970s there were some cranes coming, but not many. But the number, it began to increase a little bit 80s, but dramatically 90s, okay, and then steady growth. And why is that? And this is a very interesting one. And then the 70s and 80s slow growth is probably because of the construction of water reservoir in the 𝗔_𝗁, the area near the 𝗔_𝗁, and then they come for wintering. But the biggest issue was usually the cranes are staying in Siberia, and they coming down during the winter to stay. Some going all the way to the Hokkaido, but some in the DMZ area or North Korea. And then North Korea in the 1990s, after the collapse of Soviet Union, had trouble. This is a time of sufferings, okay? And then, which means that they had not many things to feed their people. And then why? Because the Soviet Union stopped exporting fertilizers, and then the North Korean economy was really collapsed, and so a lot of people just died. And so they took every grain left on the plane, because the cranes are coming to North Korean wetland to pick up some of the grains not harvested. And so, so some people said the cranes coming all the way down to the south or DMZ are like the Cold War defectors coming down. And so you may wonder whether people, especially the farmer, would welcome it or not. I'm talking about year 2000. They were threatened. Why? Well, the cranes are harmless. They are beautiful. However, as the number of cranes are increasing, the Korean government are interested in designating the area as a sort of ecological protection area. And the UNESCO is also interested in this. And the worldwide sort of call for preserving that area, right? And preserving the area means another control of their daily life. And they had enough of control by the military through their lives, farming and developing, the farmland, and then so about 80 the farmers mobilized 80 tractors and coming to the rice paddy area, and then plow them up, and then so that the cranes could not come and then pick up the grains. And then there are some other newspaper articles saying that we will chase out the birds and the humans first. We have to leave first. That's the story of early 2000s. Now, 2010s and then even 2020s, interesting reversal. And then they are welcoming the birds coming. And then they left over some grains and intentionally, okay, and then they flooded the rice paddy so that the cranes allow the wet land so that they can stay for the winter, and then that's why the graph goes up more and more, and even they intentionally give, I think it's a gift. They intentionally, the tractor is being used to give out the grains. And then this is usually done in February. The cranes are coming usually in November after the harvest and staying overnight, over winter, and then leaving like February or March. So this is sort of a farewell gift, because they are going to fly long and then could be hungry, and so there is an emotional attachment to the crane. It's interesting. So you may wonder what happened between the two periods. The first, the government push and the international communities push for preservation area, designation of preservation area failed against opposition from the farmers. And then the farmers and the residents realized that this is really good for local economy, because a lot of people are coming. So ecotourism is picking up. And then people are coming and then spend their money. And then the reputation of that area is good. So that's a very political economic kind of explanations. But there is another reason which I want to emphasize. And a lot of people noted that the political economic side. But another thing is the there is a great drop in rice consumption in Korea. And then there is multiple reasons. First, the population is not growing, and the younger generation have a different diet, and rice also being imported. I mean, there is a number of reasons. And so that the price is not going up, and so that the farmers were worried. And then also, as I said, as the 𝗔𝗁 line going up, the farmers are hoping that more development would be possible in their favor, but like better farming technology or other things. But instead, poultry industry coming in, and there are a lot of chicken farms and the pig farms, and then they are creating a lot of polluted materials. Okay. and also the possibility of avian influenza. And once avian influenza spread, the whole of chickens have to be killed. And then what about the cranes? There is the real so existential sort of issues that the cranes and the farmers faced together. And so they have some sympathy with each other, or empathy. And the farmers and cranes have become alike. So it's a whole very different situations in the early, in comparison with early 2000s. And so now the crane images, artifacts are everywhere. And on the this is the rice, and then you can see the cranes here. And this is a very famous and then high level rice. And then this is interesting. This is a Polish, and then Polish artifact has image of the cranes. So if you go to 𝗄𝗏 County, then you will see a number of use of the cranes for different purposes. So I'm going to stop the crane story here. I can go on and on, but before that. I just want to say that it is one of the 3 major research projects on the DMZ and the hope in the Anthropocene, and we want to talk about not the apocalypse in the Anthropocene, but the hope we can have. But there are other the collaborative works with real engineers and scientists, and this is with engineer. This is different AI. Artificial intelligence specialist, the 𝗘𝗃𝗁 working to develop how to analyze the crane pictures and count them automatically, easily. And then we developed the prototype algorithm. And then this one is more direct influenced by the cranes staying over winter and their waste, how they could be seen as fertilizers, and then what kind of microorganisms ecology changing over time. And so if it is good for the rice, then there is a real reason for us, for the farmers to invite the cranes to come. So there is another interesting collaborative work going on. And then the second project I have about now is 4 minutes. Yeah, I can do that. And it's done with the postdoctoral fellow Hara-san. And then this is Chun-Yi. Chun-Yi is this is Seoul, and then this is west coast, and then this is bay, and bay is like the water into the land, and then if you have artificial embankment, then you will, and then you're filling up these areas with soils and other things, and then you can have a huge amount of land, and that's an idea. And then it's not the only place in all of the South Korean peninsula and Korean peninsula, and then the number of areas and number of districts increased and then peaked in the you can see that in terms of area in the 70s. And the Cheongsu Bay started in 1980, like at the peak. And then why? Because rice is a major staple, feeding people. And then before, I think in the 1970s, the situation was getting much better. But there are a lot of people who couldn't feed themselves enough. And so reclamation project started in 1980. Who did that? The Hyundai. And then the legendary leader of the Hyundai company is Jung-Ju-young. And then very smart, use oil tank, abandoned oil tank to finish up that project, and which allowed them to finish the project much earlier. It took about only 9 months, and projected to be taking more than 40 months. So it's a dramatically shortened, and the land is being used for rice paddy, okay, mostly, and there are some other the land used for cow and others, and then mechanized farming. It cannot be done, the traditional farming by manual. The farmers putting the grain, and then it's an American style, and as you can imagine, there is a lot of criticisms. It changed. They are not complaining about the new land, but they're complaining about the lost land, lost ecological situations, and especially fishing, right? And it's the whole sea collapsed, and they claim. And all of a sudden, it's a dramatic change, like in a matter of 5 years. And then all of a sudden they found the migratory birds are coming, and numerous, and the most migratory birds are coming in South Korea, and it's called the paradise, ecological paradise. And so how to deal with this? Study that, and then so a systematic survey, and survey science, what the Dr. Sung called the 𝗬vey science study, and then very systematically count, and then make a record, and then on the basis of that census, the census is important, census, and then they made a proposal how to keep it going, okay, and then also they reason what's the cause, and then. Because of mechanical farming, there is less human intervention. And the birds don't like human intervention, right? So more the birds are coming, and also because they have to use huge combined harvesters, which is very not efficient. So there is a lot of leftover grains. So that's the reason. And then there is entanglement. Now the more intentional feeding, okay, and then monitoring, bird watching, festival. It's changing the people, and then people's livelihood, and then people are sort of living on that business. And interestingly, with emphasis of solar energy, which is an Anthropocene issue, right? Energy issue, and the invasion of solar panels, and that's not really good for the birds, and the people began to make demonstrations on the street, and so this is a placard that they put it up, and then we oppose the solar panels. And then one way of doing the opposition is more study and monitoring sites. There's more monitoring sites. So, in conclusion, I would say, coming back to my earlier points, it's a multiple temporalities, and very accidental or contingent, and also we can see that the relationship. I mean, what is human being? What is the cranes? What is bird? It's relational ontology or modern human ontology, and then it's changing over time. And then when we are talking about Korean Anthropocene, I think we need to take into consideration military issues, the Cold War issue, and then also the state-led developmentalism, and and obviously the human actions on the earth reclamation issues. Thank you very much.
Thanks for Professor Park's very insightful lectures, and I would really like to hear more the current stories. It's very insightful, and learn more about the Anthropocenes in the DMZs and how the unintentional consequences occur when humans try to intervene. But due to the time limit, we have to move on to the next sections. Our next speaker is Professor Mohachi from Osaka University. And his topic is entangled effect thinking with pharmaceutical pollution. Please.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you all of you for coming, and Wenhua for organizing this event, and all the others who, Dr. Buhm and the others who helped support to make this event happen, and for the kind invitation. This is my first time, and actually second day in Taiwan, so I'm very glad to be here and have this conversation around Anthropocene, which is obviously a very important issue for me as well. I'm coming from a medical background, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. First of all, just let me again emphasize I'm very happy to be here in a library and doing this in a library. We are going to talk about degraded landscapes today, and these days it seems to me that libraries, not physically, but in many senses, are degraded landscapes. But I still really like to be in libraries, and having these kind of workshops in libraries is a really good idea. So thank you for that. Also, thank you, Professor Park, for the very insightful and exciting presentation. It reminded me of a small island in Osaka, where I'm coming from. There's in a bay, Osaka Bay, there is a small island that is kind of like an industry waste disposal island, and it's supposed to be one of the center of the next expo in 2025. And it's as I said, it's an industry waste site, so they try to reclaim it for the expo, but it's also a beloved place for migratory birds. So there are many bird watchers and ecologists who actually would like to have it as a waste disposal site. It's much better for the birds. So it's kind of reminded me of your story of that. That is another Anthropocene landscape. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about my ongoing research and how they are related to Anthropocene landscapes, if at all. Let's see, does it work? Okay, so first just talk a little bit about where I'm coming from. I'm coming from Osaka, Osaka University. It's one of the 7 big public universities in Japan, and I'm coming from a department that is called, it's called the School of Human Sciences. We just celebrated the 50th anniversary of this school. That's the poster on the right side. And yeah, so I'm coming from something that's called the Human Sciences. School of Human Sciences, there are like 30 departments. It's supposed to be a very interdisciplinary school. Yeah, sociologists, anthropologists, philosophers, behavioral scientists, all kinds of. But one common element. Okay. One common thing is obviously they are all interested in humans. But if you see the the kanji, the Chinese character way, of course it's all about humans, but it's not anthropology and it's also not humanities. So it's different from humanities. So humans are not supposed to be the center of research, but the object of research. But then, of course, as you will see, much of my research is related to non-humans, humans that are or phenomena that not necessarily you can put in this framework of human sciences. So there are many challenges there, obviously. And I'm also coming from a department that's called Kyosei Studies in Japanese, which is, those of you who know the Chinese characters, probably most of you here, you can see it's about coexistence. So again, many of my colleagues are interested in coexistence of humans, but of course, if you go to the root of this word, it's not about human coexistence, but it's about coexistence between human and non-human, human and other than human living beings. So there's also a lot of interesting kind of questions and also, let's say, academic issues that can be opened up from here, just thinking about where I'm coming from. So I'm mostly interested in medical aspects of coexistence, but that tends to be in my recent research, as you will see, have to do a lot with the environmental impact and effect of medicine, and especially how humans live together, how they coexist with non-humans. And non-humans are not necessarily animals and plants, but can be, for example, as you will see, pharmaceuticals and drugs. In that kind of concept of coexistence. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a living being, although the Chinese character implies living. So these slides are from a recent exhibition that I had a chance to visit in Bologna, in Italy, and the exhibition was just simply called Anthropocene. It was actually it's going around the world, so I'm not sure where they are now. There's also a film related to this one. It's basically organized and done by Canadian photographers who went around the world, taken photos and also collecting items that can be kind of put under this umbrella of the Anthropocene and how humans have affected the Earth, the planet. So you can see, for example, oil plantations in Malaysia, or you can see the mines in the USA, or you can see Lagos in Nigeria, where humans are. I mean, human settlements are everywhere, as far as the eyes can see. But one common thing, and one that I want to emphasize and want to call your attention to, is that most of these images, and most of the images that we have when we are talking about Anthropocene Earth landscapes, is that most of these landscapes are without humans, actually. So we also saw many photos in Professor Park's presentation, but many of them were with birds, or some you had farmers, but mostly were without humans. So when we are talking about Anthropocene landscapes, they are Anthropocene also in a sense that they are an effect. They are a human effect you can see on these landscapes, but it's not necessarily that humans are present on those landscapes for some reason, and that's a very important imaginary that we have about the Anthropocene. So that's why I'm also maybe just kind of calling your attention to it, or maybe we can come back to this in the discussion. I prefer to talk about effects than objects or landscapes. The landscapes are also objects of research, of course. But I prefer to talk about effects that are entangled, where humans and non-humans are entangled, even if we cannot see necessarily the humans here directly. And that also is what Anna Tsing, one of the most important thinkers of Anthropocene in anthropology, the field that I'm coming from, says. She says, ruins are now our gardens, degraded, blasted landscapes produce our livelihoods. So that's why I really like to underline this, that landscapes produce our livelihoods. And even the most promising oasis of natural plenty requires massive interventions to be maintained. So that's basically what I'm trying to again, call your attention to with this citation from Anna Tsing, is that landscapes are not necessarily the, at least for me as an anthropologist, not necessarily landscapes are themselves the objects of research, but more what effect they have, or how they provide a context for coexistence between humans and non-humans. So here is, for example, a landscape that maybe some of you are familiar with, some of you not so much. It's from Minamata in Japan. Minamata had a very famous mercury poisoning pollution, environmental pollution in the 1950s. And this is Minamata 3 years ago, so you have very nice parks that were built on the site of the pollution, of course. And then you have, of course, this kind of memorials for deceased people. And then, of course, you have all kinds of exhibitions where they will see, like that on the left down to the left, you can see a lot of pharmaceuticals and drugs. That is the amount of drug for a person who was a victim of this mercury poisoning, who had to take it for, as far as I can remember, I can't see it properly, but I think it was 2 months amount of pharmaceuticals that one person, one victim had to take. So that's also, what I'm trying to say is that kind of pharmaceuticals are also the effect of mercury poisoning. And in that sense, this is also an Anthropocene landscape, just like the beautiful garden on the left side, on the right side, where that was created obviously by the government, local government. And then of course you have also people who had to live with the effects of mercury poisoning itself. So I want to emphasize this, how landscapes are also effects in many senses, and sometimes there are pharmaceutical effects, as you can see. So to get closer a little bit to what I'm doing, my research is about pharmaceutical pollution, and I'm interested in how pharmaceuticals that we take, not necessarily after environmental pollution, but let's say antidepressants, antibiotics, diabetes medications, all kinds of medications that we take, how they end up in our environment, and how we share our environment, our pharmaceutically polluted environment with other living beings. In technical terms, it's called EPPP, environmental persistent pharmaceutical pollutants, and it's basically, especially in big cities, it's everywhere around us. I don't know how much you know about this, but basically when you take a medication, anything between 20 to 80% is basically going down in the toilet. So it's not metabolized by your body, but it's going out and it's going back to the sewage system and back to rivers, and then of course it becomes part of the environment. And it cannot be treated by sewage filtering. So famous cases are chemical antidepressants in sewage waters in London, for example, antibiotic residues in Hanoi, Vietnam, where I do some of my research, or anti-influenza drugs in rivers in Osaka that were revealed in 2011, as far as I can remember. And so this kind of uncontrolled wastewater treatments in drugs and manufacturing plants are also another way to that these kind of drugs are going out to the environment. Of course, this can be controlled. I mean, you can make better wastewater treatment in drug manufacturing plants, but it's still the case. Many parts in famous cases are in India, but also in Europe, US, that manufacturing plants where drugs are manufactured are leaking, and a lot of antibiotics are, for example, leaking out to neighboring rivers. And so, of course, it has an impact on behavior and psychological characteristics of birds and insects, especially small animals. And that's what researchers on the right side, published in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, have pointed out. Ecological studies pointed out that in London there are many huge amount of antidepressants in not only in the Thames but in many other small rivers and sewage system. And so the small birds, insects, are basically changing their reproductive cycle because of the antidepressants, and they take it as Londoners take. So they take it together with the population of London. And then on the left side you can see our manufacturing plants in Hyderabad, in India, where antibiotics are leaking out from the plants, creating antibiotic residues, and of course huge hotspots for developing antibiotic resistance in these places. And then of course farmers living in those places go bankrupt because they can't use their fields anymore for agriculture. Another interesting, do I have like what, 5 minutes more? 5, 10? Yeah. Another interesting area that has been well researched in this pharmaceutical pollution is how of course resistance develops. So there are many medications, antibiotics of course most famous, many medications, but not only medications. You put a little bit, if you widen out the picture, as these researchers from the Stockholm Resilience Center did, antibiotics are part of a bigger group that you could call biocides, and those are chemicals that humans design consciously to kill other living entities, like herbicides, insecticides are among them, right? So our contemporary forms of agriculture, industry, and you could say governance is based on killing other living beings, so that we can, so that humans can have a more prosperous life. And what these researchers are kind of calling for is a different sort of governance, because the problem is with all of these biocides that the herbs or the insects or the bacteria that they are designed against, of course they develop resistance that you probably well know. Not only antibiotics, it was also an issue with malaria, also with COVID. So obviously living entities will develop resistance against these chemicals, and of course only those who can develop resistance will survive, and so this is an evolutionary kind of rabbit hole. So you can just develop all kinds of new chemicals, but there will be always some forms of living beings who will develop resistance, and then you can keep going on with this. Technologically speaking, of course, you can keep going forever, but what these researchers suggest is that probably it's not purely a matter of technological innovation, but also governance, like how we how we created a human-centered governance of the planet and how we can change it if we want. And rather than following up with new innovations, you can maybe innovate new forms of governance that has a place or space for example, bacteria or herbs or insects, and not only a place of being a target of I mean, not killing them, but being part of the equation. Now, what I'm doing in my own research is basically looking at the other side of pharmaceutical ecologies, namely drug development, and how it can be something more than technological development. And that's, I'm going to show you one small case study of that. So, basically it's a comparative research. I'm doing research in scientific laboratories, in forests, with ecologists, in medicinal gardens that I'm going to talk about a little bit, and also in clinics and hospitals. So the point of my comparison is just being here in Taiwan. I think it's worth mentioning it, not necessarily everywhere and in all kinds of circumstances, but basically I'm looking at medicinal plant gardens in Vietnam and Japan. And the reason for that is, for this is that obviously they are the two peripheries of traditional Chinese medicine, and they have all very interesting histories of how they developed traditional medicine in both of these places, which are, in some senses, of course, are related to Chinese medicine, but in some other senses are very different histories. So I'm interested in these two peripheries and compare them what can we see from there. But basically, what I'm interested in, how drug development is a social ecological system, and how health promotion, including traditional Chinese medicine in these places, is embedded in an ongoing and ever ongoing experimentation with medications. And to relate to today's topic is also, I'm interested in the interpretation of plants, human bodies, and also non-human bodies, and also how it's related to the future of the planet. So let me just very quickly talk about the details, and then I will finish in 2-3 slides. No worries. So I'm not going to talk about the Vietnamese side today, only the Japanese one, because I think it's kind of just don't have time for that much. But basically in Japan, I'm doing research in a place, it's called Uda. It's in Nara Prefecture, and probably some of you know Nara is the historical, ancient historical capital of Japan. But this place is not where the capital used to be, but it's in the mountains. It's really deep in the mountains. And it used to be a place where a lot of medicinal plants were grown, not only grown but also manufactured. So there were, historically speaking, people from the forest would collect the medicinal plants, and those plants were turned into crude drugs in Uda, where I'm doing my research. So it's on the crossroads of many historically important sites like the Ise Shrine and Kyoto, the other capital, Nara, Osaka. So people used to live there. I mean, many people live there, basing their livelihoods on manufacturing drugs, and also experimenting with new kinds of medications in their medicinal gardens. So, for example, one famous medicinal garden, historical one, is this one. It's the Morino Medicinal Herb Garden. So that's a garden where 300 years ago, when the Edo shogunate started, more than 300 years ago, roughly. In these gardens, they were experimenting with Chinese medicinal plants that they were bringing from China. So until that, most of the medicinal plants were imported from China. So they wanted to make wanted to create an independent Japanese pharmaceutical industry. So this garden was one of the places where they actually experimented with how to grow Chinese medicinal plants in Japan. So it's one of the oldest private medicinal plant garden in Japan. And not so far from this garden, and that's much more the focus of my research, is a small community, a grassroots movement. It's called Akino Herbal Community Garden, which are local citizens and also people from other places in Japan. Created this garden in 2015, and of course they have a lot of historical context for this. Of course, there is this famous garden next to them, but more than that, they are very environmentally conscious, and they're trying to create a community less dependent on pharmaceuticals and using more traditional Chinese medicine or medicinal plants. Not only Chinese, actually, they also grow European and other medicinal plants, and kind of trying to be more conscious of their own bodies and also of the environment. So they are very, they're suggesting that having a more healthy body means also you have a more healthy environment, and creating better or environmentally more sustainable medications will help their bodies to be more healthy. So they are, I'm also part of this group, so we gather, let's say, twice a month, but many of them, of course, go there much more because it's closer for them, and they learn to grow these plants, and they try to collect information from older people who know more about growing these plants. And of course, they also help ecological scientists who are coming to this place and want to study these plants and what's their environmental effect. So this is, for some of you, it might seem to be a very banal and simple grassroots activity. So why I'm interested in it? Basically, it's I try to think of this garden along with Natasha Myers, science STS scholar in Canada, with whose citation I'm going to finish this presentation. And she writes in a collection of essays that's called Infrastructure, Environment, and Life in the Anthropocene. That kind of, we can learn a lot about human, non-human relations in gardens. She says, alongside farms, forests, and plantations, gardens are crucial sites for examining the more than human dimensions of social, political, and economic life, offering profound insights into forms and governance. And again, I have to emphasize this part of governance. Political economy and ecology, industry, labor, and more. And the last one is probably the most important. Gardens are sites where people explicitly stage and restage human relationships with nature. And I think that's basically what that is what I would call an effect of the Anthropocene. Like we kind of realize that we have to rethink, or not only rethink, but actually redo our relationship with non-human partners in nature, and then we have to actually rethink what ecologists and nature are in the Anthropocene. So thank you for your attention, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Professor Mohachi's wonderful lectures. When we discuss the Anthropocene issue, we often mention the human, non-human is very important, but today's talk learn more about in the non-human. Non-human is a very big category, and we have animals and what you mentioned, planets. And now we have Dr. Meadows. He will talk about another dimension of non-humans is called mining. And let's welcome Professor Meadows.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum, and thank you very much for the introduction. So, the title of my talk today is Interchanges between the Anthropocene and the Chthulucene, entanglements of hookworms, workers, local communities, missionaries, pieces, and industrial capital around the Qingshan colliery in the early 20th century. So my talk deals with anti-hookworm activities around the Qingshan colliery. And Qingshan is situated here, at the border of the Chinese provinces of Hunan and Jiangxi. And yes, and as my talk deals with industrial coal mining, I think it's easy to get how is it related to the Anthropocene and also to the Capitolocene, because in the debate concerning the Anthropocene, it has been argued that the term Anthropocene is somehow misleading, as it was not. It's not a human species that is responsible for the current geological time, but a specific form of production, and that is why some prefer the term Capitolocene. And in recent years, there's also the term Chthulucene that Donna Haraway has brought in, and it alludes to the entanglements of diverse planetary agents, different species, and it has its own temporality. And the Chthulucene is in my talk today because of the hookworm infection. So here we can see a current depiction of the hookworm cycle, the life history of the hookworm. On the left, yes, here on the left we have the hookworm larvae, and these can infect the human via the skin. And inside the body, the larvae, they roam through the body, they grow, and they can cause symptoms of disease like fever, anemia, so it's a rather chronic disease, and severe anemia is among the worst effects. And in the intestines, they reproduce the worms, they lay eggs, and from these eggs, larvae hatch again, which can lead to another infection. Among the agents of parasitological research in the early 20th century China were medical missionaries. So in China there was no overarching colonial medicine, so somehow the missionaries, they could fill a void and became active in parasitological research. And one of them was 𝗟·히𝗁𝗁 of the Changsha Hospital of the Yale Missionary Society. And however, in these years, so in the 1910s, the influence of the missionaries waned a little bit because there came other agents in, like the Rockefeller Foundation. So Hume asked the Rockefeller Foundation to support the hookworm activities, and also the Chinese government. For example, they financed the Shanghai Medical College. In the 1910s, there were two big hookworm studies in Qingshan. The first one by Alfred Cumming-Street in 1914. The second one by Yan Fuqing between 1917 and 1920. And I should mention that these hookworm studies did not result from an urgent medical problem, but rather from hookworm activities in other regions, for example, conducted by the Rockefeller Foundation. The Qingshan colliery was owned by the Chinese Hangyeping Iron and Coal Co. And in 1898, the entrepreneur 𝗙𝗁 had bought around 400 coal mines, and some of them were more than 200 years old. And he needed the coke from there for the Hanyang Iron and Steel Works. And the company also employed a team of German engineers. So Shang had asked Gustav Leino to prospect for coal, and he had also suggested Pingshan. And we can see the influence of what 𝗟 has called the German underground empire. So there was German capital involved, the company 𝗘𝗶𝗿𝗀. Then they imported plant facilities like coking ovens, and here these electrical trains from Germany. Later the Japanese took it over somehow, but in the beginning the Germans. And however, large parts of the population rejected these plants and the machinery, so that the facilities and Leinung had to be protected by military forces. Ried's relation to the Hangyeping Iron and Coal Co was ambitious. Does this work? Yeah? Okay. I quote Ried from his report of 1914. The commercial development of the mineral resources, not to mention the social and economic welfare of the inhabitants, will suffer severe damage if practical measures are not taken from the first to combat hookworm infection in this locality. So the so-called development or the advent of the Anthropocene or Chthulucene, not Chthulucene, the Capitalocene, had not only positive effects, and Ried somehow hoped to counteract this development with hookworm campaigns. In the following, I will concentrate a little bit more on Jens' study, because it was more extended and more influential, because he had the support of the company and also of the local government. And we see again here the waning influence of the missionaries. Jan was not a missionary, and he was appointed by the International Health Board of the Rockefeller Foundation. And then also here, when we see where he published his results in the National Medical Journal of China, and not in the China Medical Journal, which was the organ of the missionaries. When Jan began his study, the company had around 12,000 workers, and they produced around 100,000 tons of coal and 250 tons of coal per year. And Jan's study was kind of a cartography, and that cartography had different levels. Amongst others, Jan tried to map the temperature. So this is a table from his report, and he measured the temperature in different parts of the shafts. Further levels of his cartography were the general layout of the mine, the employment structure, the ventilation, underground working conditions, the water supply, the sewage, the latrines, the bathrooms, the accommodations of the workers, and infection rates. Interesting part of his study is the water map. So he tried to follow the ways the rainwater took through the surface of the mines. There he found that there were different kind of mines, and some of them were mined with so-called native methods. So there's an interesting study of Jeff Honeybrooks, and he describes how these mines were used for subsistence before, and the people came there in the winter months to mine with simple tools. And Jan identified the native mines as the ideal breeding ground for the hookworm. he said that muddy water to the depth of 1/2 to 1 foot covers the entire floor, which, when mixed with feces and urine, forms an excellent culture bed for hookworm and other infections. So we have seen the cycle, and there was feces on the ground, it was heat, humidity, and according to him, this was one of the main sources of infection. However, he also said that the situation in the industrial mines was not much better. So according to him, these shafts were so infectious that sometimes a single sitting on the wet ground will give characteristic symptoms of groundage on that part of the body coming in contact with the wet cloth. So this groundage is like a rash or itching at a point of entrance where the hookworm larvae enter the body. And even people who came to the mines only for a short time could get infected. And Jan supported his findings with stool examinations. And stool examinations were a really important practice in parasitology in early 20th century China. The missionary had made extensive use of this practice. So this is actually a chart, a worm chart that the missionaries shared via the China Medical Missionary Channel or the China Medical Channel. They changed the name. And here we see the worm eggs, and they could be easily seen by the missionary doctors with the microscope because they were comparatively big. There was no staining needed. And yeah, some of the missionaries, medical missionaries, were more active in this regard. For example, James Laidlaw Maxwell Jr., who was in Tainan. And so they asked their colleagues in the numerous missionary hospitals in China to analyze the stools of the patients for worm eggs. And by that way they made worm maps. This is one for the hookworm. So one of the Latin names is 𝗟:𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and we can also see that Taiwan was heavily infected according to this map. But they made also maps for other kinds of worms, and generally they maintain that China is a heavily infected country. Yang did 615 stool examinations, and he found an infection rate for hookworm of 49.8%. However, it was much higher for the people working underground, 85.1%. And in the end, Reed and Jan suggested similar measures. So, however, Reed's suggestions were hardly implemented, and he blamed the conservative and indifferent laissez-faire of the Chinese officials and the oriental habit of the workers for that. So here we have othering process as we had in the maps. And the International Health Board, they made a draft for hookworm campaign that was based on Jan's finding. And amongst the measures suggested were the education of the workers through exhibitions and posters, for example, systematic examination and treatment of the workers, improvements of the water supply and the sanitary infrastructure, then also fines like punishment of wild defecation, and further research by the sanitary department. So they established a permanent sanitary department there. So somehow these hookworm campaigns were a tool of control. So it seemed possible with Jan's finding to control hookworm, the workers, and even the fluid water which found its way through the surface of the mines through small pores and cracks. However, there were also flaws that evaded categorization and survey. For example, the mobility of the workers, because they often changed the working groups and couldn't be monitored. Also, some of the workers evaded treatment. In the beginning, they handed the worm drugs out to take at home, but then they suspected that the workers didn't take the drugs, and so they established a hospital. But even there, some of the workers tried to get rid of the drugs they got in their mouth. And even the stools of the police force couldn't be monitored as desired, because they had a suspicion that the police handed in the stools of their prisoners instead of their own. Nevertheless, Jan considered the campaign as success in 1920 as the infection rate decreased to 39.5%, and also there was growing awareness of hookworm amongst the workers. So what we can see in Pingshang are the entanglements of science and imperialism. The rising interest in hookworm opened up new possibilities for the doctors, and the hookworm research was structured by the interest of the company, so the workers had no say in that at all. And there were also imperial tendencies in parasitology, because when the researchers identified the cause of disease, they did not just identify the cause of disease, but they conveyed knowledge structures, epistemic patterns, to which this knowledge was bound to. And that way, connections to the Chthulucene were cut to transform it into the Anthropocene or in the Capitolocene. However, they couldn't control the Chthulucene fully, because it influenced the research results, and so did also Chinese knowledge. For the latter point is a good example the China Hookworm Commission in the 1920s, which was a big hookworm study also by the Rockefeller Foundation in several parts of China. And what they found is that the main source of hookworm in China is here on the mulberry plantations and the fertilizing practices. And that this was the most important source of infection. And they were informed by workers from the plantations who had talked to the medical missionary 𝗟𝗱𝗓𝗂𝗏 and told him about diseases like the 𝗟∗Huang, for example, mulberry leaf yellow. And Park came to the conclusion that we know more about the hookworm nowadays than do the Chinese people, but I have recently found out that they probably knew something of the hookworm condition and of how all the parasites enter the body before we knew anything about it at all. So this had a big influence on the Rockefeller study. And also the research processes evolved between diverse agents. They were not just the result of human thinking and study. So there were several hookworm studies by the researchers from Changsha, and a good example for that point is this study of 𝗟∗ at the Xiguangshan, the antimony mountain. So there were also antimony mines, a rather recent development. And yes, 𝗏 described this as a rather smooth knowledge space, so there were several hundred working groups that mined in all directions. 𝗏 wrote that the mines run zigzag directions following the vein of the ore with an inclination of not more than 20 feet downward and forward. So with the 𝗟𝗱𝗓𝗏 you could say that the mines were more nomadic than in Pingshang, and also the study of 𝗏. He also did a water map, but he didn't analyze the water chemically, but he tried it. He described the taste, and he also drank the water and caught diarrhea because of that. And then to come into the possession of the stools, he opened a dispensary where he treated all kinds of diseases, and he asked all of his patients to hand in their stools because he said it's necessary for the treatment. And by that he found a surprisingly low infection rate amongst the miners of 6.35%, and the highest one was among the farmers with 70%. So he identified agriculture as the main source of infection. Yes, and he, rather than applying his research grid, he somehow followed the flows of the minds. But nevertheless, in the end, he suggested similar measures than Yang and Reid. So, to conclude, we have seen, I think, in the Anthropocene debate that those imperial capitalist technocratic regimes do not lead to just and sustainable development. And the parasitological cartographic practices in southern China of the early 20th century show how these regimes pervaded science. And the concept of the Chthulucene may help us to understand the assemblages that produce knowledge and code, and to attach more value to other agents involved. So not to only focus on the human, on the researcher, for example. And the Ping-Shang story reminds us both of this interconnectedness and the necessity to find ways to live in more egalitarian relationships on this planet. And also remembering the inhabitants of Ping-Shang. Earlier struggles flash up again in current Anthropocene debates because there was a resistance to coal mining before the discourse on CO2 came up. Okay, thank you, and this is some of the literature that I used.
Thanks, Dr. Meadows. And now we'll move on to the discussion section. So we'll invite the three speakers to be on the stage. Okay, now I want to thank you to the three speakers again for your wonderful presentations. And I think we now have about 20 minutes left. So now we would like to open the floor to questions from this room. So does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, please.
Should I go?
Yeah. You want to be seen.
Okay. So, thanks for the great talks, and I learned a lot about the Anthropocene today. And I have a question to Park about your recent project related to the counting crimes in the DMZ. And you just defined that project as a humble technologization. I forgot the name, but I'm curious why you put the word humble there. And I'm also interested in knowing what happened if you change the counting method in a digital way in terms of the human and crane relationship. Thank you.
Sorry, I just cannot help but adding on Khan's question on Professor Park is something about awareness, because we're seeing like why it become visible, become the issue. Just following Professor Huang's comments on the humble technology or humble intervention, I'm curious about how to turn this awareness to policy mechanism. Say like how can become the leverage, say like we have to do something, even more money to know more. Because you say it's a change before, after, but you haven't explored, there's anything like the political landscape that means some local governors or say like for election or different kinds of levels, that just to turn or make this kind of non-human actors awareness into some political actions, just, yeah.
Engineering intervention with the development of specific technology actually gets a lot of attention from the government and funding, and also when it comes to technologies like AI, people have some kind of fantasies about it, and then the technology can solve all kinds of problems. And the Anthropocene actually starts with that kind of grand-scale technological dreams, like geoengineering, spreading certain sulfur particles to reduce the sunlight, to decrease the Earth temperature, and then it's also reviving. It's a huge, hugely funded the projects, and then people actually are bought into that kind of proposals. But what we are doing is using image analysis technique developed by AI engineers. It's essential for example, self-driving car to analyze what's out there instantly, and then counting sort of image detections. And then using that technology, we thought that instead of relying on the human inspection of the scenes instantly, it cannot be covered by just one, so that you have to have a working as a team, and then it has to be a simultaneous kind of inspection. You cover this area, this region, and then the other team is covering others. So our basic idea is using AI-supported image analysis technology. Why don't we take a picture instantly and then make a count, and then by the same token, so that's an idea that we did, and then there is actually another technology which is analysis of analysis of trap camera videos, and especially within DMZ. We set up a video camera, and then when there is a motion, and then it detects, and then checking what kind of endangered species are, and then counting them. And it's a tedious job, and then ecologists are basically tired of watching the videos, and then when we offer that with use of AI technology, probably we can do not perfect, but about 70% accurate or 80% accurate. We can count the appearance of certain animals. So the birds and animals, using some automated technology, we thought that we could improve the survey science. And it's a very low-tech intervention from the standpoint of AI engineers, and which means that it's very difficult to write a high-level engineering paper, but it requires a lot of efforts to turn the basic data into the usable one, and then especially training with the existing human-made data, then the machine learning, like putting into the system, requires a lot of assistance. So in that sense, we are using high-tech AI, but it's a very humble way. And then I think that's a very essential one. And then our ultimate goal was to make it very fun and then usable, and app-based one, so that using, doing some kind of citizen science, sort of spreading out, giving the app into the tourists, eco-tourists, and then doing your count, and then see how many the cranes you do. I mean that was our goal, and then and we also thought about working with the government, the local government, to spread out and then using it as a sort of a hook to get more eco-tourists. And then we didn't really get to that level, but we had that kind of human interventions with the technology on non-humans. So it's a machine and the birds, the farmers, and actually farmers can do that, and then the surveyors and the government and so on. So that was our intention. We did at a certain level, and there is a lot of room for doing that. And political landscape, of course, the Korean is a democratic society, and then there is some elections, and the politicians are hearing what's needed, and so they hear what the farmers are thinking, and then how farmers are thinking about the cranes are also reflected in their the policy. And then, as I said, the cranes are all over, artifacts and the policies, even the daily interactions in the farmers' lives. And so it's a big part there. And then, so that the farmers are trying to use the cranes politically to protect their rice fields against invasion by poultry industry. And it's kind of an alliance. Really, I went there. They were talking about, well, thank you very much, KAIST researchers. They have some kind of image of KAIST as a high-tech KAIST researchers, and then we really need this kind of research on the impacts of the cranes on the land, and then to promote that as a sort of a way of the value of cranes coming and the value of the rice farming.
Thanks, Professor Park.
Go ahead.
So, you want to?
I wanted to comment on this.
Please go.
I don't want to interrupt you, I'm sorry. Can I? Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Let's just because I thought this is a really important point, and maybe I just wanted to open it up to further discussion a little bit. It's this kind of, I don't know if the question implied that or not, but nevertheless, I think in Anthropocene discussions there is always this kind of black and white, whether technological fixes are good or bad, or do we want technological fixes or do we want some other kind of fixes? Which is, I think it's kind of misleading, because also as we could hear it from this, from Professor Park's response, is kind of, I don't think it's the point of what technologies, how technologies or innovations change society, but what they afford to, like what kind of, in what ways they are embedded in our societies or in our ecologies. And I think your last point, that AI has a potential to do citizen science and give technologies back to the hands of citizens. I think it is a very important potential, and I'm also, in that sense, very optimistic about AIs, because I think it kind of gives you this impression, at least in the present stage. And in that sense, actually, it's very, you wouldn't never think, but it's very close to gardening, is that it gives you this idea that you don't have solutions. There are no solutions. They are only experimenting with things. And actually, engineers most of the time know this. So I don't think we have, I think most social scientists or human scientists kind of have a wrong impression of engineers doing technological fixations. I think they're no much better than most of us, that these are open questions. And only when these technologies are coming back to societies when they become like this black box, things that they're not supposed to touch, they just do their things as you are. And I think AI or gardening, what they afford to is this kind of opening up these questions, that societies or ecologies or technologies are not solutions to something, but they are just ongoing tinkering and experiments, and they're always open-ended. And just to complete or finish my comment is that the reason why I am optimistic with AI, but also I have a little fear, is that because AI, by definition, is something that keeps changing. It's never settled, it's never fixed. So then I think it helps us to understand, helps us users, of course, to understand that questions are, that you have no final solutions or complete answers to problems. Like you don't have a medication that will give you eternal life or something like that, right? There are always just this kind of experimentation, and AI can, I mean, the way AI works is kind of reminds us of this kind of openness or open, and also, and it's not only a technological matter, openness of our societies or ecologies or forms of government. These are not things that you have fixed solutions, but just open questions. So that, in that sense, I'm very optimistic with AI, but then of course I still have the fear that at a certain point it becomes another fix, where citizens or users don't have a direct relation with anymore, and then it goes back to the hands of experts and engineers, which is not that it's supposed to be.
I think we have 3 minutes left, so it allows less questions. Please. Please.
So my initial question was to Dr. 𝗏𝗏𝗅𝗏, but I think this can be expanded to everyone, I guess. So from your case study, like when we think of garden, we often think that there needs to be certain physical infrastructure that comes before, like such as like housing styles or like community centers in your case. So, but if you suggested like this effects instead of landscape. So if this kind of physical infrastructure is also kind of Anthropocene effects, like I would be interested to know if you can tell us more about how this pre-existing effects kind of shapes and creates like the later effects. And I think that applies to everyone, how this kind of like the pre-existing settings of certain Anthropocene landscape like shapes like the soft infrastructure that comes later, or like in the case of the cranes and different birds, like it could be fields, how that kind of like the agriculture practices that existed before could have shaped what comes later. So that's my question.
Sorry, I want to jump in on the same kind of question, but just following Juno's question, I'm turning a little bit interesting to see the terminology you use is that, because Gergely, you say the optimistically or say like Anthropocene, whether this kind of more like pleasing convenient words can replace some of the words. For example, like humble technology can be also the technology for control, right? So it seems to me like this is to change the set of terminology or imply any meaning beyond that. What is a critical point we want to emphasize on that can see what kind of science we can achieve? That is also related to Dominic's research, because you nicely shows example about the study on the 𝗏𝗏𝗵 𝗵 There's two different styles of science, but somehow we don't really know, say, like, because what is the inspiration from? Is it from Rockefeller's early research in the South America for that? The southern part of America for that, or say they really have some, more, intimate or different idea under Anthropocene, so they create different, style of science. So I'm curious about, the terminology, whether we just change the terminology or really mean something.
So I also have many open questions, because I'm not from Anthropocene studies, but I will start with the question of the gardening maybe, and the settings. How they are related to the Anthropocene or Chthulucene, or the current geological time, so to say. And the example of the garden also made me think of the transformations of the garden, because I think that somehow has to be is an important strategy to change these settings, these situations. And then the garden, and we have this biblical garden Eden, for example, and then we have also was the talk of Empire's garden, so the plantation, and we have another term that comes in, because it was also suggested to speak of the plantational scene. And during your talk, I had to think about that, because then if you think about Anthropocene and so to speak Asian Anthropocene, then there was the thesis, I think it was from Chatterjee, with this developmentism. So it's not so much the capitalism that forms the Anthropocene in Asia, but developmentism. So that's an interesting thesis, and you also concluded with this development, I think, on your last slide. So I wondered, because when we talk about Anthropocene, Chthulucene, it's always to think about how to intervene. And one strategy would be to change these settings. But my question would be, would you agree with Chatterjee, with the thesis on Asian Anthropocene? And where would be possibilities to intervene from there, and we conceptualize it as if we conceptualize it as so to speak as developmental scene, maybe. Wow. Where could we intervene then? Because like development often is like a positive term for many people.
Okay, I think there's very much issues and questions to be discussed with the speakers, but due to time limit,
Can I say a few words?
Okay.
Just a few words. You can edit them out.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You can add.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
At the first, I want to comment on the human intervention and the terminology issues. The garden, farm, DMZ, all human inventions, right?
Or that.
There. And this is our tongue, our way of thinking. And non-humans like cranes don't care about it. They know how to get in. And I think Anthropocene is basically a way of thinking, a way of looking at nature and the planet, and then it's a way, if we take that idea and then the non-humans, we humans use our tongues like a garden and garden preservation and then gardening, and then it's artificial, right? But we all know that we cannot control everything. There are always surprises. Okay, the farming is also surprises. They realize that there's some conditions, inviting the migratory birds, and then also I think Chthulucene is a wonderful term to notice that the limits of our knowledge. We don't really know what's going on the earth, and microorganisms and other living entities, and so basically Anthropocene allows us and also encourages us to have that kind of possibilities, openness to the intervention by non-humans, and then maybe there can be surprises. The very good point about the developmental scene, and the biggest difference is that the developmentalism development led by the state, and it is somehow especially in East Asia, it is somehow the legacy of imperial spread in the 18th century, 19th century, early 20th century, from west to east, and there is a strong sense of catching up or surviving in the minds of East Asian people, and the science and technology is part of that, and then so a very strong sense of developmentalism, not just selling and making rich and dominance, but survival and competing with the Western forces, and then that's sort of an ingrained mindset among many people, and then also nations, and so developmentalism is a very strong the common denominator, I would say, and so that's why I think to understand the situations of the East Asian, I can say for sure that scientists would hate the spread of the terminologies like American Anthropocene, Asian Anthropocene, Korean Anthropocene. Then Anthropocene doesn't make sense. However, I understand that, but however, we have to understand the causes of the Anthropocene, the impacts of Anthropocene are very different from reason to reason. And then without considering these, the Anthropocene doesn't make any sense. Has no traction on the certain area or the people. So we have to see that's why we are watching reclamation areas and DMZ areas, and then also another part is industrial sites, and then seeing how the great acceleration took place in this area, and the impacts and why, and so I think that's a very important aspects to study Anthropocene in Asia.
kind of over time, but we still have to answer this very good question, interesting question. But I also want to relate to your comments a little bit. The reason I actually like, of course, besides the fact that I'm doing my research in ethnographic birds, among other things in gardens, I think it's a good metaphor to think with in the Anthropocene. Also because, for one thing, it talks to readers in English, because of the reason that you mentioned, that there is this biblical connotation. But I think I would like to actually talk against that kind of connotation. You can only talk against if you use the same metaphor, obviously. And for a very simple point of departure, most of my informants in Vietnam or Japan, they're working in gardens, they're doing their things in gardens, but they have not much relation to, I mean, of course you have Christians in China, in Japan and Vietnam, but most of the people I work with, they don't really have much relation with this biblical story, right? So for them it's not that story. And I'm trying to see in their daily practices what can I decipher from those ethnographic materials that kind of speaks against the biblical metaphor. And one important point that I would like to emphasize is what your question is about, is that gardens, in the Christian metaphor, gardens are a point of origin, right? They're just there. And actually, Adam and Eve don't even do much about with the garden, right? They don't really care for the garden. It's just there, it was just there from the beginning. And what I'm saying is that most of my informants are very straight about it. It's an effect. Gardens are an effect of their work, and actually not only their work, because you said it's a garden is a human invention. Actually, they are looking at the garden as also, is that something that plants do, gardens, and not only plants, actually birds. I'm not sure about birds, but actually in gardens you have a lot of, I know because we have beehives in the garden, so there are many bees who, and also many other insects, and obviously there are more birds if you have more insects. So definitely, for example, deers and wild boars would like to come into the garden, so for them, of course, it's a very obvious space. And of course, birds are also coming. And that reminds me actually a Vietnamese medical doctor that had a garden in the forest, middle of the forest. And the reason he put it in the middle of the forest is that he wanted to, he had some plants that were pollinated by birds. And the plants couldn't be grown in his own house garden because the birds would not come there. So he put this garden in the middle of the forest where he knew that the birds would come and pollinate there. So it's, in those gardens that I work in, I'm not very sure that it's only a human invention, or actually it's created together with plants and animals and other beings. And especially the people I work with, they are very conscious about that. That garden is an effect, not an object. And I think that's something that I would like to emphasize in my work. And just to, as the last moment, just to go back to whether it's worth talking about Asian Anthropocene or not Asian Anthropocene. We had this conference 5 years ago in Kyoto, in the Research Institute of Humanities and Nature. It was called Anthropocene in Asia, whatever. And I think we had a lot of interesting stories of how Anthropocene is kind of enacted locally in different places. And I think one thing that we learned, and we had this discussion after, is that all of these places, because that was the title of the conference, Asia and Anthropocene in Asia, of course, all of these local enactments were, so to say, area study speaking, say they were all in Asia. But other than that, they didn't have much in common. But they had much more in common of how they were places for, let's say, Anthropocene effects or Anthropocene landscapes, than the fact that they happen to be in, historically speaking, what we call Asia. And I think that was kind of an interesting, for me, that was an interesting insight of that conference. And maybe it's a never-ending topic, but I think, especially I think it's important when we talk about the Anthropocene, how it is locally enacted. And that kind of local enactments are, sometimes they align with regional or historical enactments, but sometimes they don't.
Yes. In the conference, it's coming in June. It's kind of an advertisement, but East Asian environmental history. And the big question will be, what is East Asia? And there will be a decision for name change to Asian environmental history. Then the question is, what is Asia? And it's a big question. And then we put the Anthropocene on there, then it's, we are having a bigger trouble. and so, but it's one way of thinking, and then one way of having a deeper discussion. And so we will see. I'm open to all kinds of ideas that put forward, that will be put forward there. And the one real final comment on the garden, and one of the humble technology we are developing at KAIST is the communication between flowers and insects. And they are using chemicals as signifiers, so sort of words. And it's interesting research, and then overall we want to have a sort of a national map of pollination and how often and in what ways, because there is a real concern about the decreasing number of bees and then other pollinators. So it's also sparked by climate change and Anthropocene effects.
Okay, thank you to our three speakers, and also allow me to advertise our next sessions will be begin at 2:00 p.m. at the same place. And finally, please allow me to thank the event organizers, including Institute of History and Philology at Academia Sinica, the National Science and Technology Councils, Taiwan STS Association, and National阳明交通universities. So this roundtable will close right now, and thank you everybody. Thank you very much.
Okay.